Later.
When you got the gig with the Rolling Stones, did you have to think twice?
No.
When Ronnie Wood joined the Rolling Stones in 1975, it wasn't a case of some unknown guitarist suddenly hitting the big time. In fact, Wood was already a seasoned rock musician with quite a reputation. He had made his mark on the London blues scene as a teenager in the mid-1960s, played in the first lineup of the Jeff Beck Group, and then joined the Small Faces when they evolved into the Faces alongside Rod Stewart. It was with the Faces that Ronnie really began to shine.
So Ronnie did have a profile, certainly a higher profile than some of the other guitarists that were mentioned, you know. There was even talk of Alexis Korner, Harvey Mandel, Wayne Perkins, Jorma Kaukonen from Jefferson Airplane. I mean, that would have been incredible, but very, very unlikely.
He's a really original guitar player. Mick and Keith were big fans of the Faces. In fact, I remember taking Mick to see the Faces play. It was the Rainbow on the North Circular. I remember him wanging on in the car on the way back about how marvellous they were.
Ronnie was the second guitarist in waiting. He really felt that even when he was in the Faces.
Just as the Faces were a kind of version of the Stones, a sort of more laddish and less decadent, you know, more boozy, laddish version of the Stones, so Ronnie was Keith to Rod Stewart's Mick Jagger. I mean, that's very clear that they were sort of Xerox of the Stones in many ways, and so people knew Ronnie in that way. You know, he was like one of the crows out of the Jungle Book with a kind of fag sticking out of his mouth and, you know, the sort of Rugrats hair.
Meanwhile, as Rod Stewart's solo career took off, Ronnie decided to put together his own solo project, cheekily named I've Got My Own Album to Do. To help with the album, he called up his friends from the English rock scene, including his close buddy Keith Richards, with whom he shared a love of blues, humor, and a bit of rock and roll mischief.
You know, so Ronnie was a bit of a cartoon, I think, you know, more than anything else. You know, you didn't revere him as a riff master or rhythm guitarist in the way that Keith was.
The main appeal about Ronnie Wood was that he felt instinctively as if he was a Rolling Stone even before he was in the Faces, I think. I remember his brother Art Wood, I interviewed him once, and he said Ronnie always felt that was his destiny. And also he was Keith Richards' playmate, which was the polar opposite of what Mick Taylor was. They were very, very different, both in the way they played and in their social lives as well.
Ronnie and I were very tight in the early 70s. He did a couple of albums with Ronnie, living at his house free of charge. Very nice. Thanks, Ron.
Ronnie and Keith, mid-73, I think, they were living together, or, you know, Keith lived at the bottom of the Wick. Ronnie was a little bit at a loose end in the Faces because Rod had this solo career that was going along at the same time, so no one in the Faces quite knew what they were, you know, what their status was, really. And Ronnie came up with his solo album in 74, which Keith and Mick both contributed. Keith actually contributed 2 great songs, Act Together and Sure the One You Need, to that, and Keith actually played at the gig.
Richards, along with Stones guitarist Mick Taylor, contributed to the album, adding to its eclectic mix.
He's making some sort of solo record, and I used to go in there and play guitar and do demos.
As they hung out, Jagger and Wood started chatting about rock and roll's classic style and the negative press the Stones were facing at the time.
He'd always have a song, Mick. We started playing around, if I should stick my pen.
Out of this discussion sprang the idea for the song It's Only Rock and Roll, But I Like It.
You know, we're writing the verses and stuff, but I was writing I Can Feel the Fire, and I said, will you sing on this with me, Mick? You know, I've already got the track. And he's going, yeah, come on. He's like, I can feel the fire, burning, burning. Anyway, so we had that going, and in between songs, we work on this other song, It's Only Rock and Roll.
Once he built the studio, I gave him a drum kit. I think it's the worst thing I ever did.
We'll go for a take. Number 3. Here we go.
We'd worn out Andy Newmark, the drummer. He'd gone to sleep upstairs, and we wanted to cut the track. So I said, I know Kenny Jones will do it. So I rang up Kenny.
He always called up when I've got one foot in the bed.
You know, Mick's here, David, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'll be right there.
And of course, I've had a drink. So I got really carefully avoiding all the police.
So about an hour later, he arrives.
So we were playing away. By this time, it's about 3 in the morning. And we were working on this song, just jamming away.
So it was Willie Weeks on bass, Kenny on drums, and being David Bowie saying, Johnny rock and roll, you know, singing the background vocals.
Although Keith Richards later added some guitar parts to the final mix, the basic track mostly featured Jagger on vocals.
Mick had taken it over to Island Studios and was starting to mix it.
How loud do you want it? Here we go. Here we go.
And he said, I've got Keith down to put his parts on.
While Wood's contribution to writing the song wasn't fully documented, the official credit went to Jagger and Richards, he did receive an inspired by credit on the album.
And Keith said, yes, I've taken the precaution of wiping all your guitar parts. And I said, oh, thanks a lot, Keith. I said, but you missed one. You've left my 12th string on there. And he went, oh. Mick said, I'll tell you what, you keep I Can Feel the Fire, which, you know, skyrocketed to oblivion in Keith's words, and I'll keep Sonny Rock and Roll. You know, and I went, okay. I still have my sights on the Stones, and stepping stones towards the stone.
The idea of the song has to do with our public persona at the time, Jagger explained in 1993. I was getting a bit tired of people having a go, all that, oh, it's not as good as their last one business. The single sleeve had a picture of me with a pen digging into me as if it were a sword. It was a lighthearted, anti-journalistic sort of thing.
It's Only Rock and Roll. You really began to wonder about, you know, what was the meaning of the Rolling Stones at this point.
It's Only Rock and Roll did not produce a top 10 single in America, which was the first time that had happened since their Satanic Majesty's request. Well, that you can understand because the Stones just did not cope with 1967. They were not a peace and love group. But in 1974, you would have thought they should have been able to come up with something, but nothing off of that album was a hit. And it actually looked like they were winding down.
The Rolling Stones, I mean, they had just come off, you know, a run of records that, I mean, is as strong as anything anyone has ever done in rock and roll. But everybody was trying to find their way in the 70s. And Goat's Head Soup and It's Only Rock and Roll are records, I think, that suggest, you know, the Rolling Stones responding to things rather than driving them. There are good songs on both Goat's Head Soup and It's Only Rock and Roll, but, you know, you can't really make a strong argument for them as, you know, major Stones statements.
Wood didn't make a fuss over the songwriting credits, but it did become an issue for Mick Taylor, who felt he wasn't properly acknowledged for his work on several songs from the same album.
Within a few weeks, Jagger was saying, actually, Keith Richards is the sound of the Stones. Mick Taylor wasn't really a Stone at all.
Like I said, towards the end of the period I was with them, I think I got, for whatever reason, disillusioned with it a little bit and a little bit bored. And being the sort of a very impulsive type of person I was and still am a little bit, I just thought, well, I don't want to do this anymore. Legend
has it that not long after the release of It's Only Rock and Roll, Wood found himself at a party, sitting between Mick Jagger and Mick Taylor.
I was sitting on this sofa in the middle. Mick Jagger was here and Mick Taylor was here.
Out of the blue, Taylor leaned over to Jagger and announced he was leaving the band.
I'll never forget it. We were having a chat and a drink. And then at one point, Taylor leans over to Jagger and says, I'm leaving the band. I'm leaving right now.
For me, I have mixed feelings about the Rolling Stones because on the one hand, I love them, and in another way, I hate them. It's a love-hate relationship with me. Always will be.
When Mick Taylor announced his departure, Jagger said he was very, very disappointed by it. I think it really shocked the band.
It really wasn't a big deal to me, leaving the Stones.
I had no idea why he left the band. It was the stupidest idea I ever heard. And he never told me really the reason.
A lot of people think I'm crazy for leaving.
Both Jagger and Wood were stunned, especially since the Stones already had studio time booked for their next sessions.
And Mick said, I think he was serious. And I said, I think he was too. And he said, what am I going to do? I said, I don't know, Mick. What do you reckon?
After Taylor walked out, Jagger turned to Wood and asked if he would consider joining the band.
And he said, would you join? And I went, I thought you'd never ask, you know. It was so funny. Eric said, I could have had that job, you know. I said, Eric, but you got to live with them.